Thanksgiving had always felt more like performance than tradition in my family. The table was long linen draped with candles flickering between name cards written in calligraphy my mother insisted on printing every year. The scent of cinnamon-glazed ham and herb stuffing floated through the air like a trap. I knew how this would go. I knew the rhythm. Arrive smiling. Compliment the centerpiece. Stay neutral. Don't talk too much about your work, or worse, your life. I had flown in from Portland that morning, exchanging my cool, pine-scented apartment for the heavy warmth of Austin's old suburban sprawl. The Hensley house hadn't changed in years, same beige siding, same driveway oil stain, same flagpole on the lawn. Inside, everything gleamed in holiday polish. My brother Brooks's 2 kids were already running circles around the living room, and my mother Maura buzzed between the kitchen and the dining room like a hostess in a 1950s ad. My father Eli stood by the window nursing a bourbon perfectly ironed as always. I found my seat at the far end of the table next to the grandkids as usual. I didn't mind. They didn't ask questions like, "So are you still doing that lighting thing?" They didn't tilt their heads when I talked about a project. They just wanted to know if I brought the glitter pens I'd promised. Dinner began the way it always did. Grace from Pastor Dane, a little too long. My mother giggling nervously when he thanked the creative talents among us wherever they may be hiding. I smiled into my napkin. Brooks handed out slices of turkey like medals. My sister-in-law Claire commented on the wine she brought like it was a vintage she'd harvested herself. I listened, I nodded, I passed the potatoes. I was quiet, but present. Then Eli stood, fork against glass. The room hushed. Everyone turned. He raised his glass high. "Here's to everyone who pulls their weight." There were scattered cheers. He wasn't done. And to Liora, he added, turning toward me with that half-smile I'd known since childhood, the artist still living off fumes and fairy lights. Laughter. Not cruel, but practiced. Familiar. My aunt chuckled into her wine. Brooks gave a low whistle and shook his head like it was all harmless fun. Claire sipped from her glass and avoided my eyes. Even Pastor Dane cracked a smile. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry either. I simply set down my fork, folded my napkin, and stood. I walked past the centerpiece, past the roasted squash and the bone china we only used once a year, past my mother whose eyes flicked up briefly but said nothing, past my father who didn't move. At the end of the table where the waiter was standing with the checkbook, I reached into my purse and handed over my card. "Add gratuity," I said. The waiter hesitated. I nodded. Without another word, I walked out the front door, the late November air cool against my skin. I didn't slam it, didn't look back. My boots clicked softly down the driveway as the laughter inside resumed a little quieter this time. My name is Liora Hensley. I'm 32 years old. I design lighting for theater and immersive art installations. I live alone in a rented apartment above a coffee shop in Portland. I've never had a job title that impressed my father, or a salary that made my brother nod in approval, but I've made light feel like music. I've transformed bare stages into sacred space. I've stayed up nights sketching beam angles just right to make a character's exit feel like a revelation, and none of that ever mattered at Thanksgiving. That night, I didn't cry in the car. I didn't call Ren or scroll through social media looking for distraction. I drove the rental through quiet Austin streets with the windows cracked just enough to let the air in. The scent of pecan pie and damp leaves drifted past as I passed house after house glowing with holiday lights. I drove with one hand on the wheel and one on my lap, still breathing slow. They said I was a burden. But that night, I stopped carrying them. My father believed in 3 things: precision, discipline, and measurable outcomes. He didn't say "I love you" often, not because he was incapable of affection, but because it didn't rank in his personal metrics of usefulness. As a retired Marine turned construction foreman, Eli Hensley viewed the world as a series of problems to be solved with sweat steel or silence. Everything else was unnecessary noise. That included mood boards, pastel palettes, or anything that required guessing at feelings, as he once put it while walking past my sketch pad. Growing up in a house shaped by rules instead of warmth, I learned early which roles got rewarded and which got quietly dismissed. My brother Brooks, older by 6 years, figured out the script early. He could recite engine specs at 11, closed his first lawn care contract at 13, and by 17 was flipping used motorcycles from our driveway. Eli didn't just praise him, he broadcasted him. At every barbecue, church event, and holiday dinner, it was always Brooks is the kind of man who doesn't just dream, he does. Meanwhile, I sat in corners with my colored pencils tracing beams of light across imaginary rooms. My fascination with shadows and glow started with a flashlight under a blanket and never really left. I'd beg to stay up during thunderstorms just to watch the power flicker and reshape the house. In 6th grade, I turned my closet into a mini theater using an old desk lamp and a paper puppet stage. My mother, Maura, had smiled then, gently adjusting the lamp so it wouldn't overheat. She didn't say much more. She rarely did. Maura existed in the spaces between Eli's declarations. She was soft-spoken schoolteacher patient, always on time with the iced tea, and never the one to contradict him, not because she lacked opinions, but because peace was her preferred currency. She'd press her palm to my back when I showed her my designs and say things like, "That's lovely, honey, just don't forget to study your math too." My childhood bedroom shared a wall with the garage. While Brooks and my father rebuilt engines together, oil staining their sleeves, I sat cross-legged on the floor, crafting paper lanterns and learning how colored gel sheets transformed bulb light. I once spent 3 days creating a full light cue for a middle school history presentation, projecting dawn to dusk across the back wall while my classmates listed Civil War dates. I got a B. My teacher called it imaginative, but not aligned with the rubric. My father's only comment was Brooks would have used PowerPoint and gotten it done in an hour. High school didn't shift much. Brooks went straight into business school, then bought a failing car lot in North Austin that now boasted 3 locations and a billboard near the airport. Every time we passed it, Eli would grin and slap the dashboard. That's legacy. And every time I'd sink a little deeper in my seat. In contrast, I took the long road. Art school. 2 internships that paid in coffee and exposure. A part-time gig at a local theater that barely covered rent but taught me everything I know about how light changes mood. I learned the temperature difference between halogen and LED could transform a scene from sterile to sacred. That shadows can tell a story faster than dialogue. That light, when designed well, isn't decoration, it's direction. But try explaining that over Easter dinner. When I was 24, I landed my first full-paying contract lighting design for a regional production of Our Town. I drove home to tell my parents, excited in that aching, desperate way only the underappreciated know. I showed them renderings, concept slides, even a few photos of test scenes. My father stared for a moment, then shrugged. Brooks just signed a 3-year lease on a new fleet. Real numbers. Real growth. My mother nodded slowly and said, "That's wonderful, sweetie. Maybe you can help us hang new curtains in the den." That night I stayed up in my old room, still painted the same faded green, wondering how many more years I'd keep offering pieces of myself to people who had already decided what I was worth. It wasn't that they hated what I did. It was that they didn't see it as real. Brooks built things people could drive. I adjusted bulbs. Brooks gave them status. I gave them ambiance. In Eli Hensley's world, only one of those deserved a seat at the table, so I learned to be quiet. I learned to show up, smile, bring a bottle of wine, laugh at the jokes, even when they were about me. I let them call my career cute, my apartment bohemian, and my silence grace. I thought that if I just kept being polite, being good, eventually they'd see me. But I was wrong. And by the time that Thanksgiving toast rolled around, what hurt wasn't that they still saw me as a burden. It was that I had kept trying to prove them wrong. It was never outright cruelty. That would have been easier to name, easier to push against. No, what I lived through was softer. Sharper in a way. 1,000 polite insults tucked behind napkin folds and compliment-shaped barbs. They always wore a smile when they landed, like the time I helped decorate my cousin Emily's wedding. Claire Brooks's wife had roped me in under the pretense of needing a little aesthetic guidance, which turned into 3 straight weekends of unpaid work. I designed the lighting for the outdoor tent, created hand-stenciled table numbers, and arranged the lantern installation along the arbor where Emily and her husband exchanged vows. On the night of the wedding, the photographer even pulled me aside and asked if I'd done events professionally. No, I'd replied just, design. She smiled and said, "You've got an eye." That was enough for me. Until Claire took the mic during her toast and thanked our incredible vendor team, especially the event planner, for making everything look magical. I wasn't mentioned, not once. Later that night, as guests danced under the glow of the exact fairy lights I had wired myself, Brooks passed me a glass of champagne and said, "See, not bad for your artsy side hustle." He winked like it was charming. I laughed because what else was I supposed to do? That's the thing. In my family, if you didn't laugh, you were being difficult, sensitive, dramatic. So I became an expert at tucking my hurt between sips of wine and well-rehearsed smiles. No confrontation, just compression. Then there was the design deck incident. I had been working for weeks on a concept for a boutique hotel lobby, sleek, warm lighting that moved with the time of day. It was a side project, speculative, but I'd shown Brooks some slides during a coffee visit, proud of the balance I'd struck between theatrical influence and commercial polish. A month later, he invited me to lunch, said he wanted my artistic opinion on a new pitch he was making to a potential investor for a high-end dealership lounge. He pulled out a tablet and scrolled through slides that looked familiar. Identical, actually. My layouts, my mock-ups, even the title font I'd customized. He had swapped the branding, slapped his logo on top, and presented it like it was his. When I asked about it softly, cautiously, he waved it off. "You said it wasn't for a client yet." "I just adapted it. It's still your vibe, right?" Then, as if offering me a reward, he added, "If it lands, maybe you can help with the lighting install." Help. Not lead, not consult. Just help. I didn't mention it again. There were smaller cuts too. My father visiting me in Portland once and walking into my studio, scanning the Edison bulbs, the hanging textiles, the repurposed stage spotlights I'd rewired into lamps. "Looks like a hobby cave," he said. "You living in here or auditioning for Cirque du Soleil?" He laughed. I offered him coffee. He didn't want any. That same weekend, I'd taken them to a local gallery exhibit where one of my lighting sculptures was part of the installation. A soft, immersive piece called Static Bloom, warm light, passing through layers of frosted acrylic that responded to sound. My father walked around it in silence, then muttered, "Interesting." Expensive nightlight. My mother, ever the diplomat, chimed in, "Well, it's creative. I'm sure it means something." And then there was Aunt June, the queen of church casserole contests and passive-aggressive observation. At Brooks's 40th birthday brunch, she sipped her mimosa and leaned toward Claire, not realizing I was within earshot. "Liora's got talent, sure," she said, "but no one's ever going to pay for that full-time." Claire didn't correct her, just smiled and nodded. I stood there holding a plate of scones I had brought from a local bakery I loved. I hadn't made them myself. I was too busy pulling a 60-hour week prepping for an installation at a non-profit theater, but I'd picked them with care. That morning, I'd even arranged them on one of Maura's old serving trays. It wasn't much, but it was something. And still, somehow, I was the one who just showed up. That phrase, "just showed up," followed me for years, as if presence alone was a burden. As if by existing without conforming, I was always slightly off-key, but I never raised my voice, never argued back. I carried those moments like pebbles in my pockets, too small to justify dropping too many to ignore. They weighed more than anyone could see. And the worst part, I kept thinking that if I worked harder, if I dressed a little sharper, landed a better contract, stopped talking about art, and talked about clients. Instead, maybe one day I'd walk into a room and not feel like I had to prove I belonged there, but no amount of trying could drown out what they'd already decided: Brooks builds business. I rearranged light bulbs. That was the joke. And I was always the punchline. After I paid for Thanksgiving dinner and walked out, I didn't send the usual follow-up thank you text to my mother. No polite hope everyone got home safe in the family group thread. No emojis, no explanations, just silence. For the first time, I let the quiet stay. I flew back to Portland the next morning on a half-full flight, watching the clouds shift over central Texas, feeling like I'd slipped out of a costume I didn't realize I'd been wearing. When I landed, I didn't rush to catch up on emails or unpack or rejoin the world. I let myself go still. The loft I rented above the florist shop had never felt more like mine. The afternoon light slanted just right through the skylight pooling across my work table where sketches and swatches lay untouched. I didn't touch them for 3 days. I moved slower, ate soup, let the heater creak and settle around me like an old friend. It wasn't depression, it was a kind of re-entry. My body was adjusting to the weight I no longer carried. On the 4th day, Rin stopped by. She let herself in as she always did, carrying 2 almond croissants and a tote bag full of half-used candles and a roll of velvet ribbon she said I might need for something. She didn't ask what had happened. She just handed me a coffee and said, "You're quieter than usual, but steadier too." I didn't say much back. I didn't have to. Ren had known me since college, back when we were both living on coffee and high-concept ideas that didn't pay the rent. She had a way of reading the space around me like a set design, looking not just at what was present, but what had shifted. I went back to work that week. There was a small theater in the southeast part of the city that had asked me to design lighting for an experimental piece called Boundary. It wasn't a high-budget production, but the script moved something in me, half monologue, half movement, all about a woman unpacking decades of being asked to shrink. I didn't just light the stage. I choreographed its shadows. Each scene began with dim, narrow focus, and by the end, the light stretched fully across the space, washing the floor and the back wall in gold. I used mirrors, low fog, silent transitions. It was the kind of project that lived in your bones for weeks. The night before tech rehearsal, Rin walked through the space as I was adjusting one of the side rigs. She stood in the middle of the stage, arms loose at her sides, eyes tilted up to catch the arc of a soft amber wash. "This isn't about theater," she said. "This is about you." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. I hadn't realized it until then, but everything I had built into that show, every spread of light, every deliberate pause was a kind of apology to myself. Or maybe a reclamation. After opening night, the cast and crew held a small reception in the lobby surrounded by string lights and chipped wine glasses. Someone from the audience, a girl barely 20 wearing Doc Martens and an oversized blazer, came up to me and said, "That last scene." When the whole space opened up, I felt like I could finally breathe. I smiled, nodded, thanked her. But inside, something cracked open. A space I'd kept closed for years. Not grief, not vindication, just recognition. Rin, of course, had an idea the following week. "You should show the installation lighting process," she said. "Behind-the-scenes stuff. Artists never share enough of their guts." I shrugged. "I'm not great at self-promotion." "Then let the work do it," she replied, already pulling out her phone. She filmed a quick clip while I reset one of the mirrors, no talking, just the sweep of movement, the light changing as I stepped into and out of frame. I forgot about it. 2 days later, she posted a 12-second video on TikTok with the caption, "When Light Becomes Language." It was the kind of soft, abstract caption that usually floats past unnoticed. But for some reason it didn't. The video caught traction slow, at first, then fast. Comments rolled in. "Why is this making me emotional? I feel seen, and I don't know why." "This is what anxiety not being in the room looks like." Views jumped from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. By the weekend, it had crossed 500K. Ren texted me in all caps, "You're going viral." I replied with a gif of a shrugging cat. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to downplay it, to tell myself it was just algorithm luck, but another part of me, quieter, braver, recognized what was happening. People weren't responding to flash or clever editing. They were responding to intention, to space, to light that wasn't decorative but directional. It didn't take long for someone to DM me, an assistant director from a West Coast theater festival. She'd seen the video, wanted to know more. I didn't have a portfolio ready. I hadn't updated my website in 8 months, but I answered anyway. And just like that, silence had turned into a doorway. It wasn't the clip Ren posted that went viral. Not at first. That one had modest reach, a quiet ripple of appreciation among theater kids and design lovers. It was the second clip, the one someone else took during the final performance of Boundary, that caught fire. Just 12 seconds long, filmed from the second row, slightly grainy but timed perfectly. It captured the exact moment the main character stepped forward, lifted her arms into the widening pool of gold light I'd sculpted to unfold like dawn, and delivered the final line, "You don't need permission to illuminate." The audience hadn't cheered. Not right away. They'd just sat in that breath-holding stillness that tells you something landed deeper than applause. The clip ended right there just before the lights faded. No names, no credits. Just a soft whoosh of silence and stage light. It hit 100,000 views by morning. I didn't even know about it until Ren called and said, "Are you sitting down?" I was technically cross-legged on my studio floor, surrounded by bolts of fabric and gel samples I'd been sorting for a different job. She read a few of the comments out loud, strangers calling the piece transformational, haunting, the kind of work that lives in your bones. One person said it made them cry. Another wrote, "I've never seen light used this deliberately before. Whoever designed this understands people." By the time I checked the post myself, it had passed 500,000 views, and my name was finally attached because someone in the comments had asked who did the lighting and the theater had replied. Then someone else tagged me. Then someone else stitched the video overlaying a montage of women dancing alone in dim rooms with the audio and my name in the caption. Then it was out of my hands. Within 3 days, it passed 2.1 million views. My inbox became unrecognizable. Invitations, inquiries. A New York-based podcast host wanted to do an episode on the design of emotional space. A lighting director from a touring Broadway show sent a message that ended with, "You ever want to assist on something bigger, call me." Even my former professor, who once gave me a B for an installation he said was too abstract for practical application, left a comment with a heart emoji and the words, "Knew you had it." I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. Not just the attention, but the clarity. For once, the work wasn't being filtered through a family dinner or a wedding tent or someone else's slideshow. It stood alone, and people saw it. The night it crossed the 2 million mark, I lit a single candle on my windowsill and let the room go dark except for that flame. Not dramatic, just mine. It was past midnight when the message came. A text from my mother. No emojis, no punctuation. Just 5 words. "You looked different." I stared at it for a long time. Not congratulations. Not I saw your work. Not your father and I are proud. Just different. I read it again, trying to figure out the tone. Was it an olive branch? A veiled critique? A misstep disguised as an observation? It was hard to say. My mother had always spoken through implication. She mastered the art of gentle distance, the kind that doesn't push you away, but never pulls you close. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I wasn't ready to collapse this new version of myself back into the old patterns. I needed space, and for once I had it. The next morning, I walked into my studio and began sketching. Not for a client, not for a pitch, just to map out how a space might look if it were designed for someone who had finally been allowed to take up room. I drew wide arches, soft lighting curves, long sightlines without obstruction. A room built not to impress, but to include. And at the center, a circle of light, not a spotlight, not a halo, just an invitation to stand and be seen. The work, I realized, had always known what I needed, even when I didn't. It started with a listing buried deep in the corner of a print architectural catalog Ren brought me from an art bookshop. I hadn't been looking seriously. I didn't even know I was ready. But there it was, a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of the woods, just outside Portland cedar siding, wraparound deck clear-story windows, a backyard that blurred into a pine grove. The price was modest, at least by city standards. And thanks to the new commissions rolling in, mostly from independent theaters and one surprisingly generous licensing deal, I could actually afford the down payment. For once, I didn't have to talk myself out of wanting it. No one in my family knew. It wasn't secrecy out of spite. It was preservation. After years of hearing my work described as a phase, a hobby, a nice little thing she does, I wanted one thing that hadn't passed through the filter of their opinion. I didn't want questions about the mortgage or backhanded comments about choosing something manageable or the inevitable suggestion that Brooks could help with resale down the line. I didn't want help. I wanted peace. The first time I stepped inside the place was empty, still carrying the ghost of someone else's furniture. Dust patterns lingered where bookshelves used to stand. The air smelled like pine and plaster, but light poured in through the high windows like it had been waiting for someone who knew what to do with it. I walked barefoot across the floor, and with every creak, every echoing footstep, I could feel space opening inside me that had been closed off for years. I closed the deal quietly. No celebratory Instagram post, no group text, just a set of keys resting in my palm like a secret I wasn't ready to share. The first month was spent with paint under my nails and sawdust in my hair. I wasn't fixing the place up for resale or for guests or to make it look expensive. I was curating it like a canvas. The living room became an experiment in warm saturation. Ochre walls, smoked glass fixtures, a pendant light over the reading chair that glowed like late afternoon. In the kitchen, I installed a dimmable track system that curved gently above the counter, its copper finish echoing the teapot I'd owned since college. Every fixture, every bulb, every angle was intentional, not escape, but declaration. I wired in ambient strips along the hallway baseboards that lit up when I passed by. Soft light, no harsh corners. In the studio room, I added a ceiling-mounted reflector that mimicked moonlight. A quiet trick, but it made working past midnight feel like a gift instead of a grind. Most people renovate to impress. I was building something sacred. The backyard took longer. I spent weekends clearing brush, laying stepping stones from the deck to a small bench I'd salvaged from a thrift shop. Over time, I wrapped the fence posts in woven LED twine and added sconces to the patio. One afternoon, I carried a table out from the garage and set it under the canopy of trees. I didn't know what for yet. I just knew it felt right to have it there, like the promise of a gathering I hadn't dared host until now. Wren visited a few weeks in. She walked in, looked around slowly, and said, "It's like your brain finally has square footage." I laughed, but I knew what she meant. Every room was shaped with permission, not from anyone else, but from myself. For years, I'd been working out of borrowed spaces, tiny apartments, temporary rentals, shared studios with roommates who used my design tools to open wine bottles. This was mine. And not just legally, spiritually, emotionally. I didn't need anyone to clap. I didn't need validation from people who didn't understand what it meant to arrange your life like light-layered, responsive, quietly powerful. One night, I sat in the corner of my new living room with the overheads off just a single wall wash, casting slow-moving shadows across the ceiling. I thought about how many times I'd walked into family dinners and tried to make myself smaller, less opinionated, less proud, more agreeable. I thought about the countless little jabs dressed as jokes and how long I had let them bend me. Not anymore. This house wasn't a hiding place. It was a perimeter. It was the first place I'd ever lived where I didn't feel like I had to explain the life I'd built inside it. I wasn't hiding, I whispered to no one, the walls warm around me. I was declaring independence one pendant light at a time. It started with a box of blank cardstock I found in a tucked-away corner of a print supply shop downtown, off-white linen paper with just enough texture to catch the light. I ran my fingers across the surface and knew immediately this was what the invitations needed to feel like. Something real, tactile, unrushed. I hadn't planned to host anything, not really. But one morning, while watching the backyard fill with golden morning light, I saw the long oak table I'd placed under the trees and realized it was waiting for something. Not an audience, not a performance, a gathering, a space for people who didn't need me to explain why I do what I do. A space that didn't require permission to take up space. I pulled out my sketch pad that afternoon and began outlining the design. No branding, no digital RSVP links, no QR codes or hashtags, just a folded card, blind embossed with a soft floral edge and a single handwritten line on the inside. Let's celebrate what we've built for ourselves. Nothing more. I wanted the invitation to feel like a whisper placed gently into someone's palm. An acknowledgement, not a request. The guest list came together slowly but intentionally. Wren, of course, was first. Without her, the entire shape of the past year would have looked different. Then Ava, my lighting mentor from grad school, who once told me that the best designers are the ones who make people feel something without ever being seen. I added Nathan and Caleb, a couple I'd met through an immersive theater project the previous spring. They'd become friends over long lighting setup nights and Thai takeout in folding chairs. And I included Marianne, the program coordinator at the nonprofit arts space, who had given me my first paid commission after watching me work for hours on a volunteer piece without asking for credit. These were people who saw the full version of me, not just the polished renderings or the deliverables, but the grit underneath. They never asked me to shrink. They never looked past me at someone shinier. I stopped at 35 names. That number felt right, just enough to fill the garden with energy, not enough to tip it into spectacle. None of the envelopes bore the name Hensley. I didn't hesitate, not once. There was no internal tug of war, no voice saying, well, maybe you should include your mother just to be polite. The invitations weren't about politeness. They were about precision. I was curating presence, not managing optics. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about drawing a boundary. That had already been done quietly the day I left Thanksgiving dinner without a word. This was something else, a declaration of who mattered in this new space, who had earned proximity, who had chosen me when there was nothing to gain from it. I spent the next few evenings addressing the envelopes by hand in gold ink. Wren came over with a bottle of wine and sat across from me, music humming low in the background. She didn't ask about the guest list. She knew. What are you calling this thing? She asked as she watched me fold another card. The gathering, I said. No theme, no occasion, just togetherness. She nodded and we clinked glasses. I mailed the invitations in small batches, walking to the post box in the early morning while the street was still quiet. There was something ceremonial about sliding each envelope into the slot. Like I was releasing a signal flare to the people who helped rebuild me, one conversation, one affirmation at a time. A few days later, the replies began arriving, not by text or email, but in the return envelopes I'd tucked inside each card. Handwritten notes that felt like little windows into the lives I'd once brushed against, now circling back with warmth. Wouldn't miss it. Your work helped me see my own more clearly. Thank you for thinking of me. I've never been invited to something that felt like this. No one asked what to bring. No one asked who else was coming. No one tried to make it about them. It was the kind of alignment I hadn't known was possible in community soft-grounded, freely given. One afternoon, while walking back from the market, I passed a florist setting up a sidewalk arrangement. Without thinking, I stopped and picked out a bundle of dried lavender and eucalyptus. The scent followed me home, and I tucked it into a ceramic vase I'd made in a beginner's pottery class I once took just for fun. It sat in the center of the oak table outside. I didn't decorate beyond that. The light I knew would do the rest. There was a time in my life when I would have posted the invite online, counted likes, worried over the lighting for photos, coordinated a playlist to match the vibe. But this time, I didn't need anyone else's approval to prove it mattered. The people who were meant to be there had already said yes, and the ones who weren't, well, they wouldn't know until much, much later, and by then it would be too late to ask why. The night of the gathering, the garden came alive without effort. There were no decorations, no color scheme, no forced speeches or games. Just the smell of roasted root vegetables drifting in from the kitchen, the flicker of beeswax candles along the wooden table, and the sound of soft jazz humming from a vintage speaker tucked near the herb wall. Guests wandered between the house and the garden, some slipping off their shoes to feel the cool stone path underfoot, others sipping wine while staring up into the glow of the string lights woven between the cedar posts. Someone laughed, really laughed, and I realized I hadn't heard that kind of sound in a long time. Not the brittle chuckles of obligation, not the low hum of family performance, but something lighter, present. At one point, I stepped back toward the edge of the garden, letting the others settle into the rhythm of conversation. I stood barefoot under the lights, holding a glass of plum-colored wine, my other hand brushing against the sleeve of my linen dress. Wren, never one to miss a moment, lifted her phone and pointed it at me. I didn't pose. I didn't move. I just stood there taking it in. The hush, the glow, the gentle knowing that I had built this from the lights to the invitations to the quiet dignity in the air. 15 seconds. That's all she captured. Just me standing in the garden, backlit by warm halos of light, the silhouettes of friends laughing behind me at the table. She added a single caption when she posted it later that night. She paid for Thanksgiving and built her own table. I didn't know she'd posted it until the next morning. I woke up to a series of buzzes and a blinking notification badge I wasn't used to seeing. TikTok. I rarely opened the app, let alone used it. But there it was, her post sitting at nearly 300,000 views by 9 a.m. comments climbing by the second. This is soft power, the kind of peace I dream about. Where do I find a friend group like this? She looks like freedom. I scrolled in disbelief, my thumb hesitant as the screen updated with new likes and shares. The video wasn't flashy, no filters, no transitions, no trending audio. Just a woman standing still in a garden she built with her own hands. But maybe that's why it landed. It wasn't curated to perform. It just was. Honest, unapologetic. By noon, it had passed 750,000 views. By evening, over 1 million. I had voicemails from a podcaster in Chicago, a design publication editor in Santa Fe, and a nonprofit organizer in Vermont who asked if I'd be interested in speaking about aesthetic healing spaces for trauma survivors. It was surreal. I had spent so many years being told I was too abstract, too soft, too delicate, only to discover that the very thing I had been minimizing was what made people stop and see me. But the strangest message came in the form of silence. From my family, there was nothing at first. No texts, no missed calls, no sarcastic replies on Instagram. I didn't expect a parade, but I knew they'd seen it. Claire followed Ren on TikTok. My mom checked Facebook every morning like it was scripture. My dad had a group thread with Brooks and half his college friends. They never missed anything trending. And then, sometime late that night, a ripple began. Brooks posted an old family photo on his Instagram story, just a flash of a Christmas dinner years ago. Me sitting at the far end of the table, slightly out of frame. The caption read, "Some people forget their roots. Subtle, predictable." A few hours later, my mom texted, "No greeting, no context, just, the house looks nice. You didn't tell us." It wasn't curiosity, it was commentary. A quiet reprimand wrapped in observation. I didn't answer. Then came the email from my father. Subject line, "Your choices." The message was just 2 sentences. "We saw everything. You made people think we don't love you." That was when I closed my laptop. It wasn't that their responses hurt, though they did. It was that even now, with the lights shining, the house built the peace evident in every frame of that video, they still couldn't ask the one question that mattered. Are you happy? No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the light I'd created. Just the echo of their discomfort in watching someone they thought they had defined walk entirely out of their frame. I stood on the porch that night barefoot again, the scent of eucalyptus still clinging to the breeze. Inside, my inbox was glowing. Outside, the garden was still. I looked up at the lights and thought not for the first time that some silences are louder than applause. And that's when I knew. They'd seen it. All of it. It started with the photo. A square, grainy image from Christmas 8 years ago posted on Brooks' Instagram story. We were all younger, shinier, less frayed by life. The whole family stood around the carved roast wine glasses lifted in half-genuine cheer. Maura smiling like she was trying to believe her own version of joy. Eli stiff but proud in his cable-knit sweater. Brooks dead center, of course, with his fiancée at the time clinging to his arm. Me off to the side, almost cropped out one hand, mid-gesture the other, holding a tray of candles I had designed, and poured myself completely unacknowledged then, just as now. Over the photo he'd written, "Some people forget their roots." No tag, no name. Just implication surgical public unmistakable. I didn't reply, didn't repost. I just screenshotted it and saved it to a folder I'd quietly started narrative threads. There were 5 files in it now. Brooks' post was the 6th. Later that evening, I was prepping a mock-up for a commission. A healing center in Olympia wanted light sculptures that responded to motion, something I'd never done before. I was half lost in drafting when Maura's message buzzed in. The name alone tightened my spine, a reaction I didn't think I still had. It read, "You didn't tell us about the house. No punctuation, no emoji, not a question, not an invitation. Just control disguised as curiosity." My thumb hovered over the screen. There was so much I could say about why I didn't tell them, about what they didn't earn. But silence had become its own language, and I was finally fluent. So I screenshot that one too. Then, just after midnight, the email arrived. I saw the sender and paused. I hadn't gotten a direct message from my father in over 2 years. The subject line was simple, severe, your choices. I clicked, knowing exactly what I'd find. "We saw everything. You embarrassed us. You made people think we don't care. People are talking." I read it 3 times, not one sentence about my work, the success, the house, the joy. Just the bruised echo of their reputation. That I made them look uncaring, not that they had been. I closed my laptop slowly, resting my palms on the desk. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't even breaking, just recalibrating. For decades, their narrative had been the only one allowed Liora, the emotional one, the idealistic one, the dreamer who drained, who stayed quiet, who'd never built anything real. Now I had built a home, a career, a moment that reached over 2 million people, and their only response was to weaponize nostalgia and shame. This wasn't a conversation. It was a war of framing. So I screenshot the email, saved it in the same folder. Ren noticed the shift. She always did. I was restocking hardware at the studio, sorting light brackets and mirrored gels when she leaned against the doorway with that look. "You're collecting receipts," she said gently. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I'm documenting. For clarity. Not revenge." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Because what you're doing is the quiet kind of revenge. The dangerous kind." I smiled, not denying it. "I'm just making sure that if the story ever gets twisted beyond recognition, I've got the raw film." She walked over, lifted a brass fitting, then set it down. "You always were good with light, bending it, refracting it. Now you're just doing it with truth." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I pulled out the sketch for the Olympia piece and pointed to a soft ripple in the design. "Motion triggers light here. A simple shift and suddenly everything's illuminated." She smiled. "Sounds poetic." "It's engineering," I said. "But yeah, maybe both." Later that week, I found out from a mutual cousin that my parents were fielding questions at church. Something about how I bought a house, if I had a benefactor, whether I was okay. That word again, burden, muttered in prayer circles, coded in concern. They didn't like losing control of the narrative, and I had given them none. They wanted me to call, to explain, to play the familiar role. But I didn't. I let their discomfort sit. Let them spin. Let the internet's vision of me whole, luminous, barefoot in the garden hover louder than their edits. The truth was, I hadn't forgotten my roots. I just stopped letting them choke the life out of me. The message came through a church email. Not even directly to me, it had been sent through the contact form on my old portfolio website. The subject line was vague, a kind request from Pastor Dane. I hadn't seen that name in years. Pastor Dane Matheson, tall, genteel hair like he'd stepped off a Hallmark set. He'd baptized me when I was 7 and called me Sweet Spirit until I stopped attending youth group and started asking questions no one wanted to answer. The message was polite, as always. "Liora, I hope you're well. Your family is understandably shaken by recent events and would love the opportunity for a quiet, private dialogue to clear the air. I've offered my study at the church as a space for reflection and healing. If you're open, I believe this could be helpful to all." Helpful to all, not to me. To all. I didn't reply right away. I forwarded it to Ren with a one-line caption, "Oh, now they've sent the pastor." She wrote back, "Just to need a burning bush and a choir," but something about it pulled at me. Not because I thought it would change anything, but because I wanted to see what their version of healing looked like when curated by someone with a cross on the wall and a tie that matched his sermon slides. So I replied, "Sure. I'm available Friday afternoon." When I arrived at the church, I could smell the coffee before I even opened the door. Weak and cinnamon-heavy, the exact kind they served at every potluck. The building looked exactly the same. Beige carpet, dusty fake ferns, a wall-mounted TV still showing the PowerPoint verse of the week. Pastor Dane greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Liora, so good to see you." He led me to his study, and that's when I saw them. Eli, Maura, Brooks, all seated in the room, already no surprise in their eyes, no awkward shuffling, no, "We didn't know you were coming." This wasn't a spontaneous meeting. This was theater. And I was the final cast member. I didn't sit. I stayed by the door and nodded once. Didn't realize this was a group session. Pastor Dane gestured to the empty chair. We thought it might be fruitful to all be together, just for some open conversation. Eli's arms were crossed. Maura looked freshly powdered like she thought this was a photo op. Brooks wore his dealership smile, the one that could close a deal on a lemon in 30 seconds flat. Brooks spoke first. "Look, Liora, nobody's here to attack you. But things have escalated. The internet's a wild place." I didn't move. Maura jumped in. "We just thought maybe if you clarified that we've always supported your passion." "Supported?" I asked softly. Pastor Dane interrupted, calm and neutral. "It's not about rehashing old wounds. It's about moving forward." Eli grunted. "It's about not making this family look like fools." There it was. I slipped my phone out of my pocket, opened the voice memo app, hit record, set it face down on the arm of the empty chair. No one noticed. They kept talking about how the TikTok made people assume they were cruel, how the extended family was asking questions, how Maura's book club was whispering. Brooks mentioned that a couple business partners had raised eyebrows. Then came the real ask. Brooks again. "We were thinking maybe in your next post or video you could mention how we helped with your early ideas, that Mom gave you your first light kit, that we funded your first summer program." Maura nodded eagerly. "Just to show people we were always behind you." I looked at them one by one. Eli, who once called my designs frou-frou distraction. Maura, who'd handed me the light kit, then told me not to expect real college. Brooks, who used my portfolio in a pitch without asking. And they wanted credit. Now. I didn't argue, didn't explode, just stood there steady. "You're asking me?" I said slowly to reframe the story. "So, you're not the villains in it. It's not about villains," Pastor Dane said gently. "No," I replied. "It's about optics." And then I walked out, quietly, calmly. No slammed doors, no final lines. Just my footsteps on old carpet and the click of the church door behind me. In my car, I sat still for a moment, then opened the recording, listened to 20 seconds, saved it, forwarded it to Ren with the message, "In case I ever forget how clear it all is now." Then I deleted it from my phone. I didn't need to keep it. I'd lived the whole thing. That was enough. The studio was tucked above a bike shop off Hawthorne, one of those narrow staircases with uneven steps and a door you had to shoulder open. Liora liked that. Nothing polished, nothing curated, just a cracked window, a yellowed air conditioning unit, and a mic stand that squeaked when you adjusted it. The host, Jules Ingram, was younger than she expected, early 30s, hair clipped back in a messy bun. Eyes sharp and curious behind wire-frame glasses. Her podcast, Form and Feeling, had started as a side project during grad school, but had recently exploded among artists, architects, and set designers for its honest conversations about creative identity. No sponsors, no scripts. They sat across from each other in second-hand chairs, sipping lemon tea from mismatched mugs. The only lighting came from a string of bare Edison bulbs curled around the ceiling beam, the kind Liora once used to make theater magic in a friend's garage. "Ready when you are," Jules said, pressing the red button on the recorder. The hum of the city below faded into the background. And for the first time in a long while, Liora wasn't performing. She was just speaking. Jules opened with warmth. You've been getting a lot of attention lately, not just for your work, but for the way you talk about ownership, legacy, creative autonomy. Tell me, when did that shift happen for you?" Liora exhaled softly. "It didn't happen all at once. I think, for a while, I accepted being tolerated as enough. I thought being quiet meant being strong, that if I didn't ask for much, I wouldn't be disappointing anyone." Jules nodded slowly. "But silence," Liora continued, "isn't peace. It's just deferred pain. And I realized my family didn't exile me. They just shrank me. Until I almost disappeared myself." Jules leaned in. "Shrank you how in tiny ways?" "Leaving me off invites, laughing when I talked about color theory, asking me to spruce up events but never crediting my work, calling what I do a hobby or worse a phase. You know, my dad once referred to my lighting design as fairy lights and fumes." There was a beat of silence. Liora gave a small smile, not bitter, just resolved. People think family rejection is loud, explosive, but it's often passive, quiet. They just choose not to see you. Jules didn't interrupt. She let the words land. "I spent years trying to edit myself into their frame," Liora added. "And the truth is, they were never going to widen it." There was a shift in the air, like both women knew something weighty had just been said. "What finally changed that for you?" Jules asked. Liora thought for a moment, eyes fixed on the frayed edge of the rug beneath her feet. "A moment at Thanksgiving," she said. One sentence. A room full of laughter, and me realizing I didn't want to be tolerated anymore. I didn't want to be the family artist who made things pretty. I wanted to be the person who saw the whole room differently and claimed it. Jules paused the recording briefly to sip her tea. "That's the thing about design," she said. "It's not just decoration, it's declaration." Liora nodded. "Exactly. It's how we say, 'I belong here,' even when no one else says it for us." They talked for nearly an hour about light as narrative, about reclaiming space, about the difference between visibility and validation. Liora never said anyone's name. She didn't need to. The emotion was clear, and so was the transformation. At the end, Jules asked, "What would you say to someone listening, maybe a young designer, maybe someone whose family just doesn't get them, who feels invisible?" Liora hesitated, then said, "Visibility doesn't begin when others notice you. It begins when you refuse to shrink anymore, and your work, your story, doesn't need their permission to matter." Jules smiled. "That's going to land hard." And it did. The episode aired a week later, titled simply, "Shrinking Rooms, Expanding Light." It trended in creative circles by noon. By evening, it hit number 6 on the national design charts. Messages poured in, from stage managers in Chicago, from gallery assistants in Santa Fe, from high schoolers in Boise and retired set painters in Georgia. Most weren't asking for advice. They were just saying, "I feel seen." Ren sent a voice memo that night, laughing through tears. "You did it, Lee. You told the truth without naming a single name, and they still felt it." And Liora! She didn't refresh the rankings, didn't watch the download counts. Instead, she opened her bedroom window, let in the cool pine air, and lit one small lamp in the corner, a fixture she'd designed herself from scrap metal and amber glass. No filters, no edits, just light, steady and unapologetic. A week passed. The kind of week where time didn't quite move the way it used to. Liora didn't track it with meetings or commissions or even sunrise. She tracked it in small silences. A bowl of clementines on the kitchen counter, the way the morning light curved across her hardwood floors, a walk through the neighborhood where she let herself stop and look at things, not to capture them, not to catalog them, just to see. She hadn't opened her family group chat, not since the podcast aired. She hadn't checked Brooks's latest veiled jabs on social, hadn't responded to her mother's cryptic foreword of a Bible verse about forgiveness. She let them live in their noise. She was building something else, quiet but not passive, restful but not weak. On a Wednesday night, she opened Instagram, not to scroll, not to post, but to say one thing. She tapped News Story, chose a black background, and typed in, White, simple font. Silence isn't distance. Sometimes it's healing. No tags, no emojis, no explanation. She let it hang there for 24 hours. Just one breath in a noisy room. She turned off her phone afterward, placed it face down on the kitchen table, and walked barefoot out to the garden. The citronella candles were already lit from earlier. She took a seat in the old wrought iron chair she'd rescued from a flea market in Lake Oswego. The metal creaked as she sat, but it held like so much of her lately. Not untouched, just enduring. The night air smelled faintly of rosemary and wood smoke. In the distance, someone played guitar off-key but honest. It made her smile. Inside the phone buzzed once, then again. She ignored it, for a while. Eventually, she walked back in. Not out of urgency, just curiosity. The screen lit up with one name, Claire Hensley. Not Brooks, Claire. Liora hesitated for a moment, then opened the message. Coffee just us. That was all it said. No punctuation, no apology. No, I saw your story or we should talk. Just coffee, just us. And somehow that was the only invitation she didn't feel the need to brace herself against. Claire had always been different. Never loud, never cruel. She didn't join in the jokes, but she didn't stop them either. She'd been part of the background noise of Liora's family life, gentle nods at holidays, polite thank yous at events. Once years ago, she'd complimented Liora's lighting at a Christmas dinner and slipped a $50 bill into her coat pocket afterward, whispering, "That's for the rental you never charged me for." It had stuck with Liora, not the money, the gesture. She typed slowly. Sure, when Claire's reply came seconds later. Saturday, 10 a.m. The little bookshop cafe off Burnside. You know the one. Liora did know. It was the place Claire used to sneak off to after baby showers and in-law dinners, pretending she was running errands, when really she just needed a break from the curated chaos. Liora stared at the screen a moment longer, then locked her phone and slid it into the bowl of clementines on the table, smiling to herself. There were no promises in Claire's message, no grand olive branch. But maybe it was something rarer recognition untethered from performance. An ask that didn't assume a question that didn't disguise an agenda. Saturday was 3 days away. And for the first time in years, Liora didn't feel like she was waiting on a family interaction to define her week. She felt like herself, whole, visible, even in silence, especially in silence, because healing she'd learned wasn't loud. It was made in decisions like these when you chose who to respond to, when to say yes, and when to just let a single white sentence on a black screen speak the truth you no longer owed anyone else. And maybe coffee, just coffee, would be enough to start something that didn't shrink her. The cafe off Burnside was tucked behind a used bookstore with faded murals along the alley wall, half chipped angels, half abstract suns. It smelled like cinnamon scones and steam-pressed espresso, the kind of place that didn't care if you stayed for 5 minutes or 5 hours, as long as you didn't talk too loud. Liora arrived 5 minutes early and chose the table in the corner, the one near the tall window where the light fell soft but steady. Claire walked in exactly on time. No grand entrance, no overly bright smile. Just a quiet presence dressed in dark jeans flats and a muted green jacket that somehow made her look more grounded than usual. She spotted Liora and offered a cautious smile, the kind that said, "I'm here, but not I expect anything." Liora gestured toward the chair across from her. "Coffee's on me." Claire nodded and slipped into the seat. "Thanks." A beat passed. The espresso machine hissed in the background. Someone coughed from across the room. Claire broke the silence first. "I watched your podcast." "Twice." Liora raised an eyebrow, unsure whether the comment was a compliment or an opening argument. Claire didn't elaborate. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a napkin, and unfolded it. "I made notes," she said dryly. "But I'll spare you the book report." That made Liora almost laugh. Claire leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I'm not here to fix anything, Liora. I'm not that naive. But I am here to say something I should have said years ago." Liora waited. "You scared us," Claire said simply. "Not because you failed, but because you didn't. You never needed what we all thought you were supposed to need. You didn't want the house or the car dealership or to be some polished-up version of Mora 2.0. You lit your own path, literally, and we didn't know how to react except with bad jokes and tight smiles. Liora stirred her tea slowly. And silence. Don't forget the silence. Claire nodded. And that. Another pause stretched, but it wasn't heavy. It just existed, like they were both figuring out how to speak a language that was always there but never practiced. You know what really stung Liora, finally said her voice even. It wasn't the toast. It wasn't even Brooks posting that old picture. It was the assumption that I would come back, that no matter what was said or done, I'd return like a loyal dog, that I'd forget, because that's what I always did. Claire's gaze dropped for a second, but she held herself steady. I think we didn't know you had somewhere else to go. Well, I do, Liora replied, voice quiet but unwavering. And I built it myself. It's mine. The light, the rooms, the people who enter them, all mine. And if anyone wants to be in that space, they don't come in with old maps. They come in as equals. Claire didn't flinch. She just nodded. I don't want to rewrite you. I just want to understand better. Maybe stand next to you sometimes if you'll let me. Liora studied her. There was no performance in Claire's eyes, just a kind of tentative truth that felt rare. Liora had learned to recognize people who wanted access without growth. Claire wasn't asking for access. She was asking for grace. Can I try again? Claire asked. Liora didn't soften, but she didn't harden either. She just took a sip of her tea, let the steam blur her vision for a moment, then said, You can try. Claire smiled. Not wide, not victorious, just real. She didn't ask to see the house, didn't push for an invite or say, Let's all sit down and talk this out. She stood when the check came, left enough cash to cover both their drinks, and said, Same time next week. Liora considered it, then nodded once. Okay. Claire gave a small wave as she left, disappearing into the afternoon light, like she'd never tried to claim more than what was given. Liora sat back in her chair and watched the wind shift the mural on the alley wall, the colors brighter now in the sun. The meeting hadn't fixed anything, but it had drawn a line, one that said, I'm not here to be explained, reshaped, or tolerated. I'm here to be known. On my terms. And for once, someone had stepped across that line without trying to erase it. The cedar table sat under a canopy of string lights, soft gold pooling on its surface like dusk made visible. Liora stood at one end watching as laughter trickled through the garden she'd built, not just with her hands but with intention. Every guest here had been chosen, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. Wren brought her usual rosemary bread and set it down beside a bowl of roasted carrots. Zoe, her old lighting mentor, arrived in a flowing shawl, carrying a bottle of wine and a quiet smile. Even Danny, the playwright who once cried during one of Leora's installations, was here snapping photos of the centerpieces made from wildflowers and thrifted glass. And then Claire. She didn't make a grand entrance, no apology speech, just a gentle nod, a bottle of cider, and a simple, This is beautiful. Liora didn't flinch. Didn't force warmth. She just said, Thanks for coming. The meal wasn't elaborate chicken salad, fresh lemonade, but it felt like ceremony. Not the kind with toasts or performance, the kind with presence. At one point, Zoe looked at Liora and said, I think this is the first time I've seen you without armor. Liora didn't laugh it off. That's because I'm finally safe without it, she said and meant it. Later, when everyone had gone and only the lanterns remained flickering in the dark, Claire lingered by the gate. She didn't ask to come inside, just looked once more at the table, the home, the life her sister-in-law had built. You don't owe me anything, she said softly, but I see you now. And I hope that matters. Liora nodded. It does. As Claire walked down the path, Liora stood still, her hands loose at her sides. Final voiceover. They said I was a burden, so I built a life they could never carry, and this time, I made the table,